This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
As the worldwide leader in private aviation, NetJets has said for more than 55 years that our top priority is the safety of our owners and employees, but our actions, especially in the past year, demonstrate our priorities louder than any words. Because of our extensive COVID-19 precautions and exceptional service, our flight demand is now higher than ever. Ready to rediscover your favorite places? Connect with a private aviation expert today at netjets.com.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Order.
Hello, I'm Susan Hume and this is the Today in Parliament podcast for Wednesday the 30th of June. Coming up, the Labour leader accuses the Prime Minister of failing to sack Matt Hancock for breaking COVID rules.
It's one rule for them and another rule for everybody else.
There was a new health secretary the following day, Mr. Speaker, and the whole country can see that.
Also, flying saucers and aliens. Peers demand details of the potential threat.
How seriously does Her Majesty's government now take UFOs in the light of this report?
But first, the Labour leader has attacked the Prime Minister for not sacking the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock when it was clear that he'd broken COVID social distancing rules. Matt Hancock resigned the day after CCTV pictures of him kissing his colleague, Gina Coladangelo, appeared in the Sun newspaper. So Keir Starmer said Boris Johnson must have been the only person in the country who looked at that photo and didn't think the Health Secretary should be sacked immediately.
It was briefed that the Prime Minister was quite happy for the Health Secretary to stay in his post. So can the Prime Minister clarify, now he's got the chance, did he sack the Health Secretary or at any point ask him to resign, yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman will notice that the Health Secretary has changed in the last 5 days. He complains about the speed with which that happened. This government moved at positively lightning speed by comparison to the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite, who spent 3 days trying and failing to sack his deputy leader, Mr. Speaker.
And Boris Johnson pointed repeatedly to the success of the vaccine programme. But Keir Starmer explained why he felt it mattered that Matt Hancock had flouted the rules.
Take the case of Ollie Beebe. I'm sorry, you might want to listen. Ollie died of leukemia on the 5th of May, the day before the photo of the former Health Secretary was taken. Ollie died, like so many other people in this pandemic, with his family and friends unable to spend time with him. When he was in hospital, he begged to see his family. But following the rules, only one member of his family was allowed to see him. His mum said, "I'm livid. We did everything we were told to do. And the man who made the rules didn't. How can that be right?" So I asked the Prime Minister again, how could he possibly think this matter was closed on Friday morning?
Mr. Speaker, we all share the grief and the pain of Ollie and his family and millions of people up and down the country who have endured the privations that this country has been through in order to get the coronavirus pandemic under control. And that is why we had a change of Health Secretary the day after the story appeared, Mr. Speaker. And that is why, actually, what we are doing as a government, instead of focusing on stuff going on within the Westminster bubble, we are focusing on rolling out that vaccine, those vaccines at a rate that will make sure that people like Ollie and his family do not have to suffer in the future.
Keir Starmer felt that reference to political tittle-tattle struck the wrong note.
I can hardly think that the Prime Minister thinks it's appropriate in response to a question about Ollie to suggest that this is, in his words, the Westminster bubble. The Westminster bubble in answer to that question, Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister said Keir Starmer was right to point to the sacrifices made by families.
But the best response, in my view, to their grief and their pain and the sufferings that they have endured is to get on with a new health secretary, which is what we have, and to, with all the energy and application that we have, to roll out those vaccines.
But the Labour leader said there was a pattern. Dominic Cummings, the Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick, the Home Secretary Priti Patel and now Matt Hancock. The Prime Minister had stood by them all when they broke the rules.
Every time it's the same old story. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that while the British people are doing everything asked of them, it's one rule for them and another rule for everybody else?
Mr. Speaker, this government, there was a new health secretary the following day, Mr. Speaker, and the whole country can see that, and we are getting on with our agenda of vaccinating the population of this country through the energy and application of the new Secretary of State for Health and the Department of Health.
The SNP's Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, turned to the midnight deadline for EU nationals resident in the UK to apply for settled status. Missing it means losing the right to live and work here. Ian Blackford said there was a backlog of hundreds of thousands of cases.
Overnight, thousands of our friends and neighbours could become illegal immigrants. They are living in fears for their jobs, their families and their livelihoods, all because this Prime Minister won't keep his word. We know all too well the experience of this government's Home Office. Dawn raids, vulnerable people deported, a hostile environment for the Windrush generation. Scotland's message to EU citizens is you're welcome here. We want you to stay. This is your home. But this UK government is causing EU citizens untold stress.
Boris Johnson said the registration scheme had been a success.
We've had huge numbers of people applying, and of course, if there are people still who have to apply, and there's been several extensions of the deadline. It's 5 years now since the Brexit referendum. We've funded 72 organisations to help vulnerable EU citizens to understand what their rights are, to make the applications. Anybody applying within the deadline will, of course, have their case dealt with, and I urge them to get on with it.
Boris Johnson there. Now, the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, has promised an end to rules requiring children to self-isolate when a pupil in the same class or bubble tests positive for coronavirus. With 375,000 children absent from state schools in England for COVID-related reasons, MPs vented their frustration with the current system. Christina Cooper reports.
Self-isolation was introduced as a means of preventing the spread of coronavirus. In schools, the system is that if a child tests positive, pupils in the same bubble have to stay at home for 10 days. But now, many MPs think the costs of the policy outweigh the benefits. The Conservative former Minister, Esther McVey, said there'd been a huge impact on children's mental health.
Given that children are extremely unlikely to suffer serious ill health as a result of catching COVID, and given the damage being done to their education and their mental health, isn't it time we stopped this self-isolation madness?
Sentiments shared by the Labour MP Jeff Smith, who received lots of emails from desperate parents in his South Manchester constituency.
Whose children have suffered multiple periods of isolation, are worried about more, and they all say we need to review the isolation rules urgently. We now hear that he's looking at plans to announce as part of Step 4, but there's no reason to wait for Step 4. Schools have got a problem now and they need to know what to do about it.
The Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, said the government was focused on getting society, including schools and colleges, back to normal. And he understood the frustrations of parents and children who felt they were being asked to self-isolate unnecessarily.
What I want to see is these restrictions, including bubbles, removed as quickly as possible, along with wider restrictions in society. I do not think it is acceptable that children should face greater restrictions over and above those of wider society, especially since they have given up so much to keep older generations safe over the last 18 months.
He said the government expected to be able to confirm plans to lift restrictions and bubbles as part of Stage 4 of the COVID roadmap, expected on the 19th of July. At that point, guidance would be issued to schools. Daily testing is one option under consideration. Labour Shadow Education Secretary Kate Green hoped schools would be notified as soon as possible about any changes.
It's 9 weeks until the new academic year begins, but we have no idea what the Secretary of State plans to keep them in class. School leaders dread another last-minute announcement. They need time to put plans in place, and their staff also desperately need a break over the summer.
The Liberal Democrat Daisy Cooper also wanted some answers, saying the number of children missing school was rising every day.
And families are at their wits' end whilst the government is once again far too slow to react. So will the government act now and establish a rapid task force with public health directors and school leaders with a mandate to keep schools open safely?
The Conservative James Daly said that in his Bury constituency, over 2,000 school children were self-isolating,
negatively impacting their social, emotional and educational development. I welcome and recognise my honourable friend's commitment to keeping children in school, but does my right honourable friend, and I'm sure he does, recognise and agree that we cannot allow this situation to continue? Surely we must learn to live with COVID-19 and remove the requirements for school bubbles together with the current policy of self-isolation at the earliest opportunity.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're very much wanting to go down that course of easing restrictions and ensuring as we come out of this pandemic is that children are one of the greatest beneficiaries. So my honourable friends and my minds are very much in the same place.
The government's current mantra is that we should learn to live with COVID. The Green Party MP, Caroline Lucas, said that shouldn't mean dumping all the risk on children. She wanted to know what the government was doing to protect them from the virus.
One of the basic things that needs to be done is to ensure better ventilation in all classrooms. If you live in New York, for example, you could consult a public website to see the ventilation status of every single classroom in the state, and there is serious investment in ventilation and filtration. Why hasn't the Secretary of State done something similar here?
The Labour MP, Clive Efford, also wanted to know what living with the virus meant for schools.
Where's the plan for improved ventilation for Nightingale classrooms so that children can socially distance within schools and not have to be sent home in bubbles? The virus is not going away. Where's the plan?
The Education Secretary pointed to the measures the government had already put in place, and he criticised Labour policy, saying that it didn't seem to be focused on keeping schools open.
Christina Cooper reporting. Well, we hear a lot about how the pandemic has had a damaging impact on people's daily lives, but a Labour MP, Tulip Siddique, has highlighted the upside for some people of working from home. She said flexible working particularly benefited women, carers, people who are disabled and other groups who suffered discrimination because of an intolerant office culture.
I have a million case studies at my fingertips, but I'll just use one, which is a mother who looks after a 5-year-old child and has a disabled husband, and she has caring responsibilities for her 80-year-old father. During the pandemic, she worked flexibly and her productivity increased, and this was reflected in her bonus. She then went to her employer when the pandemic sort of has come to an end and they're all going back to the office, and her boss said to her, "You can't continue working flexibly."
Tulip Siddique said that proved it couldn't be left up to offices to make their own decisions, and she wanted a change in the law to give people the right to flexible working from the start of their employment. You're listening to Today in Parliament with me, Susan Hume. Still to come, annoyance that football fans seem to be exempt from COVID rules.
What does the Minister think people feel when they sit at home and watch all of these people getting together, singing, kissing, hugging, chanting?
But first, the government's cut to foreign aid has been raised in the Commons yet again, with many MPs still angry at the decision and calling for a vote. Jennifer Scott reports.
The decision to reduce the spend on overseas aid from 0.7% of national income to 0.5% was justified by the Chancellor as a tough decision in light of the huge spending on coronavirus. But the government has continued to face a barrage of criticism since November's announcement, with MPs and the Speaker himself calling for a meaningful vote on the issue. The debate raged on, with the Conservative former Prime Minister Theresa May leading the charge and quoting Minister's own words.
The government's manifesto made clear that we would proudly maintain our commitment to spending 0.7% of our national income on development, a commitment enshrined in law, and one to which the new department will honour its responsibilities.
And the quote didn't end there.
Investing 0.7% of gross national income on international development is at the heart of that vision. It shows we're an enterprising, outward-looking and truly global Britain that is fully engaged with the world. That was at the end of September in 2020. In November 2020, the funding was cut. It's hardly, either it's one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing, in the government, or they were just trying to calm everybody into a sense that everything was going to be okay before they actually wielded the knife on this particular issue.
Theresa May was far from the only one with concerns about the cuts. This was the chair of the International Development Committee, Labour's Sarah Champion.
Over the last 2 years, there have been considerable and brutal reductions in overseas development aid at a time of unprecedented global need. When other nations across the globe are stepping up, the UK seems to be walking away.
For the SNP, Patrick Grady claimed there was more to the cuts than the government had revealed.
It has nothing to do with the pressures of COVID on the economy and everything to do with an ideological distrust of what aid is supposed to achieve. But aid works. Aid saves lives. 0.7% wasn't a magic number. It was agreed by developed countries in the 1970s as the result of working out how much was needed to address global poverty at the time and how much those who could afford it should contribute.
But there was even more criticism from the government benches. The former International Development Secretary, the Conservative Andrew Mitchell, questioned Boris Johnson's own commitment to girls' education, which he has often spoken about at the dispatch box.
We are cutting this investment by 40%. 700,000 fewer girls will now get into education, but also we are cutting by 60% UNICEF, an agency which is the very engine of getting girls into school and which the British government in 2010 doubled UNICEF's grant. And remember this, Madam Deputy Speaker, a third of all girls in secondary schools in Africa drop out because they become pregnant, and yet we are cutting by 85% the work that the United Nations Family Planning Agency does across the world.
His fellow Conservative, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Tom Tugendhat, said he was concerned about the cut to the UK's funding for research into tropical diseases and preventing pandemics.
We're all aware of the one we're facing today, but it's not enough to shut the stable door, as the House knows, after the horse has bolted, but to try and predict when the horse might be getting a little jittery.
But the Conservative MP, Marco Longhi, backed the government and questioned the rebels.
I am concerned with some of my colleagues. They are being so generous with other people's money, a notable socialist behaviour, I might add. Perhaps they can explain to my Dudley North taxpayers why we should spend £15 billion overseas when my residents cannot find council houses and when we still have homeless people on our streets. Some of them brave veterans.
However, the majority of those speaking in the debate not only demanded a return to the 0.7%, but a vote on it as well. Labour's Shadow Foreign Office Minister, Stephen Doherty, was damning. He said the cut was
morally wrong, it is financially illiterate, it is damaging to our soft power and reputation while others are on the rise. It is reversing at a critical time for the world, and it is out of step with this House, with the government's own side, with the public, according to the most recent polls. And I think, Mr Deputy Speaker, that Britain is and can be so much better than this.
The Foreign Office Minister, James Duddridge, said the decision to make this cut was incredibly tough, but he defended the government's record on aid spending.
The UK, looking back, has met the target of 0.7% of GNI on ODA every year since 2013. So it's with great caution we fall short of that target now.
He concluded that the government was committed to returning to 0.7% when it's able to.
Jennifer Scott. The chair of the Commons Transport Committee has lambasted Highways England for failing to fit safety technology on so-called smart motorways. The motorways allow traffic to drive on the hard shoulder, with bays for motorists to use if their vehicle breaks down. Back in 2016, the Transport Committee was told that technology which spots when a vehicle has broken down in a moving lane would be introduced straight away. But, in fact, the system will only be installed on all motorways by September next year. The Conservative Committee chair, Hugh Merriman, felt he'd been misled. He tackled Mike Wilson from Highways England.
What you're saying is, following the 9th of May 2016, all lane-running smart motorways were fitted with stopped vehicle technology, detection technology.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Right, OK, so in that case, you didn't correctly respond to us when you said you're confident it works, it will be part of standard rollout going forward.
And forgive me, but it was part of standard rollout going forward. Admittedly, I could have been clearer when I made the commitment that there was still development of the system that was necessary, but it was included as part of the standard specification from May 2018.
That did not satisfy Hugh Merriman.
Yeah, but I'm not interested in 2018. I'm interested in the day after the 9th of May 2016 and whether you were then delivering all lanes running without that technology, because you said you wouldn't.
I said that we would be part of the standard.
It would be part of standard rollout going forward.
Yeah, and it was going forward was as of May 2018.
Oh, come on. I'm sorry, that's just not good enough. When you say going forward, it doesn't mean in 2 years' time. And it doesn't need me as a lawyer to say that. We all know that's the case. I mean, I think sometimes it's better just to put the hands up and just say, it turned out not to be the case because we had supply issues or something else. But to give me that answer, I'm sorry, it's just not good enough for Parliament.
Hugh Merriman there. There was outrage in the Lords that chants of football's coming home seemed to be allowed under coronavirus restrictions in England, but an amateur rendition of Handel's Messiah is not. The Labour peer Lord Hunt was angry.
To limit inside choirs to 6 people when last night at Wembley 40,000 people were singing. The night before, my lords, they covered the roof at Wimbledon and people were cheering to the roofters. That, my lords, apparently is allowed when indoor choirs, where they can exercise proper social distancing, is not allowed. My lords, this is nonsense. The government should reverse this immediately.
Speaking for the government, Lady Barron recognised that the rules were frustrating, but the Euros match was part of a research programme into large events. And
the evidence is clear that, sadly, singing does increase the risks of transmission, and hence we have the guidance that we have been given.
Even so, the independent peer and Radio 3 presenter Lord Berkeley was irritated at the football crowds and other anomalies.
It's completely illogical to say that a group of professional singers over 6 can meet and sing, but a group of amateurs can't. It makes no sense at all. And what does the minister think people feel when they sit at home, as Lord Hunt said, and watch all of these people getting together, singing, kissing, hugging, chanting?
And the Bishop of Gloucester, the Right Reverend Rachel Treweek, argued that choirs weren't just about having fun.
Please give us some clarity on this and say what plans the government has now to review the research on congregational singing with the use of face coverings, given that singing is not an add-on to worship, but is integral to it.
The minister sympathised and said the rules would be updated as soon as public health advice changed. The government has assured peers that it constantly monitors UK airspace for credible threats after the American military admitted it had no explanation for dozens of unidentified flying objects seen by military pilots. A report from the Pentagon did not rule out the possibility that the objects were extraterrestrial. Here's Mandy Baker.
Since 2004, there have been 144 reports of unidentified flying objects in US airspace. The Pentagon was able to work out what one of them was, but that left 143 unexplained. So, should we be worried over here? A Conservative peer, Lord Safras, sounded spooked.
The report offers several possible explanations and does not rule out that these could be military aircraft with very advanced capabilities or even extraterrestrial phenomena. Either way, can my noble friend the Minister reassure members of the public that the Ministry of Defence takes reports of unidentified objects in our airspace very seriously, and will she consider publishing a detailed assessment of the data we hold?
The Defence Minister, Lady Goldie, said the government didn't hold any reports on what she termed unidentified aerial phenomena.
The MOD deals with actual threats substantiated by evidence, and the government continues to take any potential threat to the UK seriously.
Another Conservative, Lord Ridley, wasn't alarmed.
Unidentified does not mean suspicious.
Get a grip, he seemed to be saying.
The idea that in an era of mobile phone cameras, drones and frequent travel, there could possibly be alien spaceships whizzing about undetected in our atmosphere on a regular basis is not, I think, very plausible. It's much more likely that these blurred images have boring explanations, alas. Does my noble friend agree?
Lady Goldie reassured peers the skies were safe, military planes were poised.
Typhoon aircraft at RAF Lossiemouth and RAF Coningsby, they're held at high readiness, ready to intercept any threat to UK airspace.
A Labour former Defence Secretary, Lord Brown, quoted advice given to the Ministry of Defence in 2009.
In more than 50 years, no UFO sighting has indicated the existence of any military threat to the UK. There is no defence benefit in recording, collating, analysing or investigating UFO sightings, and the level of resources devoted to this task is diverting staff from more valuable defence-related activities.
So the MOD closed down its UFO desk. Labour's Lord Coker bemoaned its absence.
Where are such sightings to be reported and who to? The truth is out there, Minister, and hopefully it'll be in your answer as well.
A note of exasperation was entering Lady Goldie's voice.
We regard threats as having to exist in the first place. We regard them as having to be substantiated by evidence, and that's because we need to know what it is we are addressing and how best we can address it.
But another Labour peer, Lady Wilcox, returned to the fact that the US government hadn't ruled out the possibility of alien visitors.
I believe that Cardiff Bay is the alleged location of the Torchwood Institute, set up to deal with incidents of extraterrestrials. And indeed, the Anto Jones Shrine forms part of the tourist trail at Mermaid Quay. So 7 decades after unidentified aerial phenomena first appeared on the radar, defence ministries around the world ought to know what they are. The recent report doesn't require us to accept the reality of alien visitation, but it does require us to take UFOs seriously.
Lady Goldie said she took threats very seriously, where those threats were identifiable and could be substantiated. A Conservative, Lady Gardner, reminded the minister that one of the largest single-dish telescopes in the Southern Hemisphere was located in Parkes in New South Wales, where she was born.
Might it be of assistance to the government in helping to monitor and assess any unidentified sightings?
Not necessary, implied Lady Goldie.
The MOD, and particularly our air defence community, has both sophisticated electronic surveillance, and I myself has witnessed how this operates when I visited RAF Coningsby.
And she repeated there were always those typhoons on standby.
Mandy Baker reporting. Now, few can have failed to notice that England won its Euros match against Germany 2-0 on Tuesday night. Boris Johnson was delighted with the result.
Members from across this House will want to congratulate Gareth Southgate and his team on their 2-0 win against Germany at Wembley last night, the first time the men's team have beaten Germany in 55 years in a knockout game. We wish them all the best for their match against Ukraine on Saturday, and we'll all be hoping against hope that this time, finally, football is coming home. Mr. Speaker.
The Labour leader joined in.
Having been at Wembley for the Euro 96 semi-final and experienced firsthand the agony of that defeat, yesterday's result was truly incredible. And I know the whole House will wish the team the very best of luck on Saturday. The whole House will wish them the best of luck on Saturday, I'm sure.
That last remark was accompanied by a pointed look at the SNP Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, who did pass on his own good wishes.
Can I congratulate England for their victory last night, and of course wish them all the best in the tournament ahead. Of course, they've done well. They've won most of their matches, with the exception of the game against Scotland, where of course they even failed to score a goal. No luck.
I pass no comment. Before we go, the main news from Westminster again. The Labour leader has accused the Prime Minister of failing to sack Matt Hancock over photos of him breaking COVID rules. But the Prime Minister has insisted Mr Hancock was quickly replaced as Health Secretary. I'm Susan Hume, the studio manager was Andrew Mills, the editor was Mandy Baker, and that was the Today in Parliament podcast. Thanks for listening.
As the worldwide leader in private aviation, NetJets has said for more than 55 years that our top priority is the safety of our owners and employees. But our actions, especially in the past year, demonstrate our priorities louder than any words. Because of our extensive COVID-19 precautions and exceptional service, our flight demand is now higher than ever. Ready to rediscover your favorite places? Connect with a private aviation expert today at netjets.com.